Today's Energy Chat conversation. I'm Jesse Jenkins for theenergycollective.com, and I'm speaking today to David Mahfouda, CEO of Bandwagon, a new app-based service for your smartphone designed to make taxi sharing and trip pooling much easier and hopefully much more common. David and the Bandwagon team recently took first place in a future energy pitch competition held in New York City on June 13th. The event, hosted by ultralight startups and in partnership with the Energy Collective, among many others, gave 8 new energy startups a chance to pitch their ventures in front of a discerning panel of VC investors. So David, congratulations on your win at the Future Energy Pitch Competition, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So after winning this competition, I'm sure you've got your elevator pitch down pretty cold. So let's hear it. Give us the scoop on Bandwagon.
So you've done a good job already. Bandwagon is a ride-sharing app for taxis and car services. Unlike other taxi sharing apps, it's not a message board. So we've actually built a sophisticated route coordination server that we call the ride batch server that identifies and gracefully combines itineraries. Doesn't matter how many, it doesn't matter how disparate they are. It's a very sophisticated tool that does all the matching for users so that they don't have to spend time searching through a message board, figuring out who the right person to share with is. So that ride batch server powers 2 products. One we call the Hop Lane, which is a physical system that passengers who are waiting in line at airports use to identify the best passenger with which to share their ride. And then we have a web and mobile app that does the same thing in reverse. The problems are slightly different from the airport and to the airport. But in general, what we're doing is combining trips, reducing VMT, and saving passengers money and time on their trips to and from transportation hubs.
Great. So do you envision this primarily being rolled out at places like airports where you have a lot of people standing in line, kind of all waiting to go, generally towards the city center, or, in a common direction? Or, is this something that in the future I can kind of walk out on the curb, open my phone, and find somebody that is passing nearby that's also headed to the same place as I am?
Yeah, so yes to the second one. So we do envision this as a broad distributed platform. We actually think it's a new mode of transportation. In the past we've called it modular public transportation. It's a responsive transportation network. We think it's a new form we ultimately call it social transportation that sits in between traditional fixed infrastructure buses and trains and more responsive taxis. So in the first part of your question, you said, do you think of this as primarily a tool for transportation hubs? The answer is no, but we do think. So the correct answer is initially we think of it as a tool for transportation hubs. Also event venues, concert venues, even smaller events, galas, anytime where there are a group of people sort of all sort of aggregating in one place or being dispersed from one place. So that it's initially we're working on a hub by hub strategy, but ultimately we do see this as a distributed platform.
Great. And are your initial customers then taxi companies themselves, or are you sort of rolling this out to end users or individuals?
Yeah, so it is a two-sided market. We work, the taxis are actually our customers. So we purchase trips from taxi and car services. Then we break those trips up into individual seats. And we resell those individual seats at a slight markup to our customers and users who are passengers. So we interface both with car services and drivers and passengers.
Great. So from what I gather, your vision is to make sharing a taxi or pooling rides like this from events or for conferences or corporate meetings pretty much second nature. I imagine that a lot of regular taxi riders might be reluctant to hop into a cab with a stranger. What do you see as the key obstacles to making this more common, and how do you plan to sort of bridge those and address those obstacles?
Yeah, so I don't think about it in terms of obstacles. I think about it in terms of incentives, right? So how do we incentivize passengers in order to make them excited about getting into a taxi with another passenger, a taxi or any other vehicle? So we say taxis, but it's really just shorthand for responsive vehicle. I think we're going to see a lot of sort of differentiation and variegation in the kinds of responsive vehicles that are providing transportation in urban centers in the next couple of years. But we'll just say taxis for the time being. So how do you incentivize passengers? So the first thing I already mentioned, you make it cheaper for passengers to share. But also, particularly when passengers are waiting in line, the real driver is making it faster for passengers to share. Mm-hmm. So the reason our product is called the Hop Lane is it's a spin-off on high occupancy vehicle lane. So basically sharing passengers get priority access to departing taxis. So if you're willing to share, you get to come up to the front of the line. And that's an incentive that the airport has been granting us for the demonstration that we're running at LaGuardia Airport, because the airport runs into problems where they run out of taxis. The demand for taxis is higher than the supply, and we can step in those situations and basically consolidate demand and get more passengers home in an effective manner. And then, but I should also say, you're talking about sort of what are some of the barriers. We also do want to lower the costs involved in sharing. And some of the ways that we do that, I mentioned also earlier, our RideBat server does all of the sort of organization for our passengers, so that's a significant way of effectively lowering the cost of participating in shared rides. And then also, we don't have it yet, but very soon we are going to have social rating systems and Facebook integration, so that some of the awkwardness factor is really going to be, I think, brought down significantly because passengers will have some more information about the people that they're traveling with.
That sounds good. So you mentioned a pilot at LaGuardia Airport. I see that your site's sort of in a beta mode. So where are you at in your launch process? And what kind of early results are you getting from your trials, and what are you learning as you roll this out that maybe you weren't expecting?
Yeah, so we're still in demonstration mode. We've been booking trips both to and from the airport. We've done more trips from the airport at this point. It's about 300 trips so far, about 1,000 passengers so far. What are we learning? I think a lot of the learning that we did was really early on and really figuring out what the right incentives were. And really sort of even some of the very simple physical infrastructure that we've put in place at the airport, just sort of signage and the specific zone where passengers who are sharing can meet one another, and clear articulation of what the value propositions. I think all of those things are super important, especially when you're teaching a new behavior to passengers. I think really just the simple stuff is the stuff that's really important to get right, and we've spent a lot of time on it.
Are you finding that the biggest incentive is saving time, or is it money, or what are the big things for people?
It's really personal passengers that are traveling for leisure are sort of more incentivized by saving money, especially students. They'll actually wait around for shared rides. But really, time is the driver. Whenever we bring a shared pair up to the front of the line, everybody in line is interested in sharing, somewhat unsurprisingly. And so, it's really just the same logic that's applied to road systems, to road networks, and we're just applying it very locally to this particular queue at the airport. And I should say, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the history of ride sharing, but really the only organic, successful real-time ride-sharing programs in the United States have been facilitated basically by in-city HOV lanes. So the examples are casual carpool over the Bay Bridge, slugging in Washington, D.C., and these, this is what we were looking at when we designed the hop lane. The examples that were working organically were these examples where passengers were actually saving time getting into the city or out of the city, and that's what we've recreated at the airport in order to facilitate this behavior in for-hire vehicles.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had that in mind. I used to live in Oakland, California for about 4 years, and it was always amazed to see the folks lining up for casual carpool at different parts in Oakland and Berkeley. For those who don't know casual carpool, you need 3 vehicles to use the carpool lane to get across the Bay Bridge into or out of San Francisco, which at rush hour can mean quite a lot of time savings. So there are different sort of drop-off and pickup locations throughout the East Bay and San Francisco, where folks can just queue up in the morning, and drivers come by and pick up 2 or 3 people and fill their car and head into the city, where they drop them off at a couple of common locations, at a couple of friends actually, and that commuted into the city regularly using the system. So interesting to see that concept applied here to taxi sharing. I've run into those situations where they've run out of taxis at the airport as well, so I can certainly relate to the motives there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, the energy implications of this. You pitched this at a future energy pitch competition. You're competing against some solar energy startups and others. So what do you think the ultimate kind of energy use implications of this are, and how do you sort of see this? Why do you think you sort of edged out some of the other energy startups in that competition?
Yeah, so very straightforward. I think one of our advantages at pitching at the energy conference was that our technology was very simple for people at the event to understand.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the other technologies were significantly more sophisticated and sort of difficult for the people that were at the event to relate to personally. So I think that was definitely a competitive advantage in that context. So the other companies presented some really interesting technologies. So you're going to be doing some interviews with them as well, correct?
Yeah, we might do a couple more interviews with the runners up as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So some really really interesting stuff. I do want to say though that our contribution to the energy space is a behavioral contribution, and I think regardless of how efficient you make various technologies, if you don't figure out compelling ways of incentivizing people, consumers, businesses to use responsibly and to consume efficiently, you're going to be missing out on huge chunks of efficiency that can be gleaned in the utility space and the transportation space all across the board. So I would just urge anybody that's listening to this podcast or to this interview sort of not to discount and to really take seriously thinking about the behavioral economics around all of these new technologies, because there's a lot to be gained there, and that's sort of what we're going after specifically. And they're fast, right? So if you can there's definitely development time associated with the technology that we've built and figuring out the correct incentives to motivate passengers to reduce their vehicle miles traveled. But once it catches on, it's incredibly effective. It's incredibly easy to propagate, and you can see really huge energy savings as a result.
Yeah, I mean, I guess just the basic math: if you double the number of people in a car, you double the fuel economy for passenger mile traveled. So it can be pretty big impacts pretty quickly. Are you usually seeing 1, 2, 3? How many people are pooling together in these?
Yeah, it's between 2 and 3. So it's either 2 single passengers or a single passenger and a group of 2.
Great. And tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you end up at the helm of Bandwagon?
It's somewhat of a convoluted story. I was initially really interested in trains and wanted to build some software to make trains more accessible, but then pretty quickly realized that in the United States, really the transportation mode that needed addressing was the vehicle, and so got interested in taxis because taxis operate, are these vehicles that operate sort of almost like public transportation systems. New York City's taxi and limousine system is effectively the 7th largest public transportation system in the United States in terms of passenger volume. So thinking about what can we do to basically increase the effectiveness and the efficiency of our road and car networks. And sort of the taxi space, really the for-hire vehicle space seemed, especially with driverless cars coming, really seemed to be the space to start thinking about the future of road networks.
Yeah, so you mentioned driverless cars, sort of evolution then potentially of kind of a personal rapid transit or common car sharing in the future if we can sort of hop in, order these, self-driving taxis and I'll hop in as we go. It's an interesting vision for how this might evolve.
The self-driving, it's kind of ancillary. It's not. It doesn't. To me, it doesn't matter too much if there's a driver in the front of the vehicle or not. It's just an indication. When you think about a taxi that's driven by a computer, you start really understanding how it's a system, how it really is kind of how you can envision it as public transportation. People don't currently see taxis as public transportation, but once you take the driver out of the equation, all of a sudden it becomes more reasonable to think of these vehicles as stand-ins, as sort of this future responsive public transportation network.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess, as we're talking about the future, if all this takes off, where do you sort of see this in 5 or 10 years? Where are you and Bandwagon at after, a fully successful launch of this thing?
Yeah, so ideally this is, vehicles aren't owned by people anymore, right? So very few people own planes, very few people own buses. We think the same should be true of cars. Cars should be, or smaller vehicles should also not be owned by people. They should be parts of, not should. Ideally, eventually, they're mostly displaced by these smaller vehicles that are owned and operated by cities or private companies that provide transportation to populations instead of individuals.
Yeah, that's like an interesting vision, and I think you find a lot of alignment with the folks at Zipcar or City Car Share or some of the other car sharing services that are also recognizing just how often your car sits unutilized in the driveway or the parking lot, and why not put those to greater use and to more efficient use if you're pooling passengers the way you're envisioning.
Yeah, and taxis. So by contrast, taxis already have significantly higher utilization rates than private vehicles. So I think we're just going to see more of this, more and different ways of sort of thinking about vehicles in terms of the services they provide, instead of thinking about vehicles as a material good, as an own good.
Great. Well, so before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to add? Any heads up to give our listeners or our viewers?
Yeah, sign up. Bandwagon.io. We're in beta. Please sign up. We'd love your feedback, and we wanna get you to the airport efficiently and inexpensively.
And should that heads up mostly be for folks flying in and out of LaGuardia at this point, or where should our viewers expect to see?
Yeah, and it really sort of to any of the so our best prices are going to be to LaGuardia, but we are going to be offering rides to all three New York City airports. So for the time being, New York City. If there is anyone else on the East or West Coast that has some vehicles that they want to incorporate into our network, feel free to reach out to us also. But we're, initially for signups for users looking for transportation in the next couple of weeks, New York City is where we're offering service.
Great. Well, thanks, David. Again, this is Jesse Jenkins with theenergycollective.com, and I've been speaking to David Mahfouda, CEO of Bandwagon. You can check them out, as he said, at bandwagon.io. And David, thanks for speaking with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jesse.